Hello, my name is Mary Simmons, and welcome to Express Yourself. We will be offering a painting class on Southborough Access Media today. I am an art instructor in Southborough at Expressions Art Bar, and I'm thrilled to come to the studio today to offer this lesson to you all. Today's featured painting will be Fall Foliage. We're going to be doing every step with you together, and this is a fun painting to do. It requires absolutely no painting skills whatsoever. The background is a little bit abstract. We let it dry, and then we'll get into the fun details. You can get any size canvas board, canvas panel. This is a stretch canvas that's 16 by 20, but you can pick any size. We're going to be using acrylic paint today, and we have a few different paint brushes. You can use a cup of water, a paper towel, get yourself set up. You can put it down on the table, use an easel, or even a tabletop easel. Any of those will do. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our paint brushes. Make sure you don't get something like oils or watercolor type paint brushes. This is mainly for acrylic. We have different sizes, and I give them little nicknames to help you remember which is which. This first one here, this is a big square. It's called a flat brush, but I call it the daddy brush, just for fun. Just get any big square size paintbrush. We will also be using, see these two here? They're very similar, but one is more of a square edge and one is a little bit more rounded at the top. I call the square the brother and the rounded one the sister. Just helps me know which is which. And then you can use two round or pointy type brushes. The bigger one I'm going to call the cousin brush, and that little guy we're going to call the baby brush. Now you can do this painting with less brushes as long as you have a big and a small. That will still work. Are you ready to get started? I can't wait. Before we get started, you want to double check and make sure you have everything. You can use any cup, fill it with water. Make sure you have plenty of paper towels. You have your paintbrushes. And for the palette, I just use a simple paper plate, get my colors ready. You don't need a lot, maybe a dime size or quarter size, and if you run out, you can always add more. Now for the colors, if you look at our canvas, you see the paintings for today. Fall usually has beautiful bright colors, and for the background, we are going to start with purple. That is just going to make the forest look a little bit deeper. And then we move on, almost in the order of the rainbow, from red to oranges and yellows. And then we're going to take a break, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the other colors. So for the first step, you want to get that shading of the forest. This is just going to help the trees pop forward. So we're going to dip the daddy brush into a little bit of purple paint. Find the center of your canvas. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered. It's actually better if you're a little bit off. So I like to go a little higher or a little lower. And we are not going to paint side by side this time. We are going to do more of hatching, which is like cross X marking, where you go back and forth, up and down, using the letter X, and you overlap to get that color spread out. Now, our purple paint tends to be a little bit transparent, so you might need to do a couple of coats. So go ahead, get that first layer, that first coat of purple paint. Now you want to make sure that it's not too perfect. It's actually possible to paint too perfect because then you create this pattern or this shape. You want it to be more natural. So we're going to break it up so it doesn't look like one big stripe. You want to have some areas a little higher, some a little lower, give it a nice variation. I want to put on my second coat and at the same time break up the space a bit. Now when we switch to the next color, we will be using red. Sometimes you can clean your paintbrush between colors, but this time I'm going to skip that and I'm going to go ahead and dip right into the red paint. So we're leaving the purple paint on the brush. If you have a lot of extra paint, you can just scrape it off. You don't need to wash it, but you can get some of those big chunks off and go right into the red. Get a nice generous amount. And we're going to do a very similar step on the canvas. We're going to go right below it using the same marking and a little bit above it. After it starts to dry a couple minutes, you can overlap and have the colors touch each other. So I'm going to get started by doing those markings below and those markings above. Now, how much you need depends on how much room you have left. Don't forget, we have orange and yellow, so leave a little bit of room for those colors. Now that we have the red on, we want to make sure there's not too much of a division between the two colors. So I'm going to put little bits of red into the purple and kind of blend in between those two colors. Okay, I put little bits of red into the purple. I've also added tiny touches of purple into that red, so it's a little bit more blended in. Now, because we use purple, you want to make sure the brush is clean, because when you add purple and orange, it makes kind of a brown. So I'm going to wash that daddy brush, get all of that paint out, dry it with a paper towel. You can see if it still has paint in there, just squeeze it out. And we're going to start with a deep orange and repeat the same exact steps. A little bit below, a little bit above, and then blend between the orange and the red. Same X marking. Okay, I also went back and I changed the shape. Try to avoid having that perfect line. Break it up. We don't have to clean the paintbrush much, but you can scrape off any extra paint. You can use yellow, or you can get two different kinds of yellow. We have a deeper, warmer yellow and a lemon yellow. I'm going to start with the darker, warmer yellow and repeat the same step, but it's a little bit smaller now. You have a lot less space. So we're going to go close to the bottom. If you have another yellow, you can add that to the rest of the space or continue with the same deeper yellow. I'm adding a little bit of that bright lemon yellow to the bottom edge just to make sure I have no white left on the canvas, no white spots. You want to make sure everything gets covered. Okay, we have this nice bright background. We started with purple, went into red, orange, and then yellow. We're gonna let this dry a bit so you can go grab your pumpkin coffee or get your hot cider. Let the paint dry and we'll come back for the next part. Welcome back to today's painting session. Now that you've had a nice break, we're gonna get started with the next steps. Now, how do you know when your break's over? You look at your canvas, and if you see any shiny spots, then the paint is still wet. We need it to dry before we add those birch trees. If you don't like sitting there and watching paint dry, you can actually cheat a little bit. Sometimes I use a hair dryer or bring it outside in the sun. That will help speed up the process. Acrylic does dry pretty quickly. If it's a little bit humid, it might take a little longer, but we should be ready to go. Now you are going to use that brother brush for the next part. It's a nice little square brush. This is a good size to help you get those trees. Now, how many trees are we going to paint? I like to use an odd number. 5 is a pretty good start. Sometimes people use 4, sometimes you use 6, but 5 is a nice good number. When you do the trees, you want to make sure they're spread out. You also want to avoid being perfect. As I've said many times today, we do not want a perfect pattern. We want it to be more natural, just like in nature. You can put some closer together, some could be straighter, some could lean a little bit more. You could add a little bump, maybe even crisscross just for fun. So I'm going to get started by putting in the brother and a little bit of white paint, and we're just going to quickly draw the layout of where the trees will go, and then we'll get back and fill them in. Now there's 2 ways to hold the brother paintbrush. You've got the wide side, which is good for filling in the big areas. Then you've got the skinny side. You want to hold it so that you have the line this way. This will help you get that line, especially the edge of the tree. Now we're going to start on the left. I'm going to just make a line. I'm using the skinny side of my paintbrush. And just go all the way from the top to the bottom, or you can go from the bottom to the top. You want to make sure that the bottom of each tree is just a little bit wider than the top. So the top should always be a little bit skinnier, just like the trees you see outside. I'm going to draw another one over here. I'm going to try to avoid making them go in the same direction, kind of change it up. You also want to make sure that some are skinnier than others. So let's make a big fat one for the next one. I'm going to try to make this a little bit wider. I'm just quickly drawing the outline of each tree before I go back and fill it in. This just helps me space it out a little bit better. Okay, let's make this one a big fat one too. Okay, I'm not doing any of the branches yet. I just quickly drew the tree line. Now, some people, they work too hard with the line and they try to control their painting. It's actually better to paint more relaxed. Don't paint with your hand, just kind of loosen up and actually paint with your arm your upper arm. That gives you more control. Now that I've painted those lines quickly, then I can take my time and fill in between those lines with solid white paint. Okay, now we've got the 5 trees lined up. We're going to go on to the branches. I don't like to put too many branches on. It's just a couple on each tree, maybe 1 or 2. And we're going to be putting them towards the top of the canvas. We want to leave the bottom nice and open. Now, I don't want you to copy my branch exactly. I want you to look at your tree, see if it's skinny or if it's wide. The branch needs to be smaller than whatever tree you made. So this tree is a little bit skinny, so I need to make sure the branch is skinnier than that. I'm going to turn my brush to the line side, close to the top, just make a little line, and you want to make sure that line, when it's attached to the tree, is just a little bit thicker at the base, so it looks like it's growing out. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few on each tree. So I'm going left, some going right, some have more curve, some are steeper. And if you have a wide open space, you can add a couple of baby branches coming off the other branches. Okay, I think we have plenty of branches to go. Now, to give it that birch tree effect, we are going to be adding bits of black paint. So I'm just going to clean that brother brush a little bit. Some people prefer to use that little baby brush, but I find myself partial to the little brother. I just like that straight edge a little better. Now, the white paint is a little bit wet, but we're going to go ahead with black. Black paint is pretty strong and kind of can cover most colors, even if they're wet. You do want to be careful with the white. It will give it that gray effect when it mixes, but that gray effect will actually look nice. So if it turns a little gray, don't panic. Sometimes those are what we call happy accidents. It makes it look nice. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a black line on the left edge of every single tree, a skinny black line on the edge. I'm also going to make sure that I'm not cutting through the branches. So I will show you here. As I go down the left side of the tree and I get close to a branch, I stop and skip over it and then continue all the way down. You don't want to cut through that. So skip every time you hit a branch. We will get back to the branches later. Right now we're going to go ahead and make those skinny black lines on the left of every tree. Okay, now that we've got that left line, we're going to go ahead and start the branches. There's two ways to do it. If your branch is pretty straight, then you put the black line on the left side. But if your branch kind of comes down a bit, the black line goes on the under side of each branch. If your branches cross over, make sure you decide which is in the front and which is in the back. Now you've got all those black lines on. We're going to get started with the peeling of the bark. There's a couple of effects that we're going to put into it. The first one is more like a dry brush technique. I've got a little bit of paint on. I'm going to paint some black smudges, but I'm going to continue painting without adding more black to the paintbrush. And you'll get this dry, rough effect. So you can watch here. First, you start by putting the edge of that brother using the skinny side right on the line. Put it on the line and you pull away a little bit, and that's a nice solid amount of paint. But the more you do it, the more the paint starts to run out and it looks rough and dry. And instead of adding more paint, you want to leave that dry effect and it will look more authentic. So I'm going to go ahead and get those dry brushes, get that stroke. I'm starting on the left of every tree. Now if you accidentally add too much black, don't worry. You can do the same with white or gray paint. But having a lot of darkness in birch tree still works. So I've got those darker dry brushes on the left. I'm going to do more on the right, and we should have a little bit less paint. So those strokes should be a little lighter. you're going to do the same thing for the branches. Just be mindful that they're much skinnier. So you might not need to do all of them, but just put a little bit of stroke in each branch if you can. Okay, we finished all of the dry brush on the trunk of the tree and also on the branches. Now we're going to do a little bit of scratching down the center of the tree and maybe even a couple of tree knots. You can use the little itty bitty tip of the baby brush, get a tiny amount of black paint, maybe even wipe it off so you don't have too much. And these are just little small horizontal lines sprinkled through each tree. So I'll show you. You want to put them in bunches of 2 or 3, maybe even more. And you want to make sure they're not the same exact width. You want to keep it natural, keep it random. Just make sure that it's a little bit horizontal. You can also put some of those small scratches in the branches if there's any room. Now I'd like to put a little bit of extra on the bottom of the painting, so you can add a little bit more black, and then we can do a couple of knots which are optional. So I'm going to put a little bit more black on the bottom of each tree. Just makes it more grounded, gives it a sense of gravity. Now for the knot, which is optional, you can pick 1 or 2 trees. Sometimes if there's a tree that has a little bump that you did by accident, you can use that to your advantage and create a knot in there. You don't want to do a big circle. Make a little skinny vertical oval. And that will make that bump look a little bit more natural. You can add a very small outline just to make it 3D. Find another tree that has a bump or a wide area. I'll put another one there. I think I'll do one up here. So I think we have the birch tree pretty complete. We are going to now do the fall foliage. Now the trees are still wet, but you can work around that for a bit and then we'll go back over it, add some more leaves when it starts to dry. Now for the background, we went from purple to red to orange to yellow. For the leaves, it's a little bit similar, but we are going to skip the purple, and we don't really need that much red either. We're going to go right into orange actually. So I've got that rounded sister brush. You can use one of the round tips, the pointy brushes too, but I'm going to use this one. Get a nice glob of orange paint. Now you want to avoid doing that perfect pattern I talked about before, where you continue painting with the same rhythm. You actually want to move your wrist, move your arm. Make sure the paintbrush changes direction. That will give it more of that natural leaf effect. So I'm just going to do dabs, these little blobs of paint. Now you might not see all the colors right away, but as you add more layers, they'll start to stand out. So I'm going to start by doing the orange. This is on the top third of the painting. Because the trees are a little wet, we're going to go behind the trees first. We're not going to touch the white yet. So we're going to do orange from here up, but we're going to keep that natural line. You don't want to make it perfectly straight. I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit on the bottom as they fall to the ground. But these lines are a little bit more horizontal because they're on the ground. You don't need to move around as much. I'm going to check to see if some of the trees are dry enough to add a couple. Got some dry spots, so I'll go ahead, get some orange on there. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to switch to yellow. You can actually mix a little bit of yellow and orange together. Make your orange a little lighter. I'm going to add a tiny drop of white. You don't want that peach color. You want a nice pumpkin orange. So I put together a chunk of orange, some yellow, and I added a drop of white. It gives it that lighter orange color. And you're just going to continue layering in the same area in between the tree, towards the top of the canvas, and a little bit at the bottom of the canvas on the ground. Go ahead and sprinkle that about. Don't be afraid to cover the top of the trees and some of the branches. They're just going to be peeking through that foliage at the end. Okay, now I'm going to switch to yellow, but painting yellow on a dark background doesn't always work. You need to add a little bit of white to make sure that the color is more solid and not transparent. You don't want off-white to make sure there's enough yellow as well. So I'm blending on my plate to make sure it still looks yellow, even though it has a lot of white in it. And we're going to cover everything we just did, get in between the orange, maybe even overlap some of those orange leaves, get on the branches, sprinkle them on the ground. Okay, now we're going to add another bit of yellow, but we're going to go with even more white this time. We're not covering the entire area, we're just adding little bits to make the yellow pop. Also, make sure you continue changing that line. You don't want it perfectly straight. So I'm going to add a little bit more white, so it's almost like an off-white, very, very light yellow. And do just a couple of highlights here and there. You don't want to cover all of that purple, but you do want a few leaves to kind of come down a bit. Now, sometimes if you feel you might have added too much yellow or too much white, you can actually go back and put little bits of orange in there to break it up. Thank you for watching today's episode of Express Yourself. Today's painting class was made possible by Southborough Cultural Arts Council grant, and we want to thank Southborough Access Media for having us today. We hope you can watch us next time.